So welcome, everyone. As I always do with these talks, we'll find out just a little bit about Gigi as a person, your background, and then we're going to unpack his expertise of the township economy, where we drive past and we never look in. And hopefully today will be a window into that world, and we'll delve into it and get your understanding. Gigi's written 3 books. The first book, I think, is called Third World Child, Born White, and Zulu Bread. And then Kasinomics. And Kasi comes from the name of Lokasi, like location, but it's the economics within the location. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. And just to start off, if you could just go back, I know it wasn't your choice, but how come you landed up growing up in a rural area, very, very different to where the rest of us grew up, as I think maybe only white person in that area? And how did that affect you, and how did it affect your thinking, and then take us slowly into the business?
Great. Hi, everyone. So my parents were political activists and community workers, and they believed the only way to really change people's lives was to live like them. So my father was a very successful farmer in the Underberg area in KZN, basically gave away his farms, much to my later disappointment that I didn't at least get a farm in the rolling green hills of Underberg. My mother was a journalist, and they basically kind of had quite a journey, but ended up in Msinga. Msinga at the time was the most poverty-stricken, most arid, one of the most violent parts of South Africa. Today, Msinga is officially still the most poverty-stricken place in South Africa, also very arid, and basically started a community project, as well as kind of, because of the nature of the kind of apartheid policies and how people lived, and a lot of abuse from the police and local farmers, basically set up or challenged government and stuff. So they're very unpopular. But yeah, they built this mud hut. We had no running water, no electricity. We had lots of running water. We had the Tugela River at our doorstep, and we washed in the Tugela River. And we grew up like Zulu kids. My mother taught us at home. We were very poor, but we were rich in experiences and culture and so on. And I guess down the line, I said to my father, would he afford to send me to university? And he said, I can't afford to send you to university, but I'll prepare you for life in Africa. And in many ways, that kind of upbringing prepared us for this life. Often people say, where's Msinga? And I used to struggle to say where Msinga is. Now it just says right next door to Nkandla. So it gives you an idea of that. And yeah, so after finishing matric, my mother taught us at home for the majority of our schooling. And the last few years, I went to a local government high school, which I hated with a passion, but that was it. And we were forced to go there because the government said we had to spend more time with other children. We couldn't just be taught at home. My father said, well, they'd hang out with thousands of Zulu kids, but they didn't count as kids that we should be hanging out with. It was really a way of kind of undermining my parents, and there was an ongoing kind of process of that. And so then I finished matric, and I did a stint in the military, where my 2-year military service, where I caused more trouble by refusing to do the township duty and other things, and then entered the, I guess, broadly political arena in the kind of human rights, land rights area. Worked with various anti-apartheid organizations, and kind of in that process spent a lot of time then in townships as well. So spent time in the mid-80s in Soweto and other Gauteng townships. And that kind of got me exposure to not only rural areas, but township spaces. And eventually I left because I didn't really believe the kind of NGO sector was really going to be transformative. Couldn't find a job. So a Jewish friend of mine in Yeovil gave me a job as a bricklayer. So my first job was a bricklayer. I discovered that there was a real opportunity in accessing these spaces that other people couldn't access. And for instance, I was approached to start a telephone business in the townships. And again, it was some friends of a friend of mine in Yeovil who had a business in little telephones at the time when the Telkom ticky boxes weren't working anymore. It was before cell phones. Asked me to set up these businesses. And I started setting up telephone businesses in the hostels. I mean, the hostels, this was 1990, 91. Townships were crazy places. And I set up telephones in Alexandra Hostel, which was a no-go area for anyone, but they needed to phone. JP Hostel down the road here in Soweto and downtown Joburg and stuff. And that was my kind of first real entrepreneurial business venture. And in it, I realized this real, that there's these invisible economies that people just have no idea of and tend to be seen as kind of poor, unsophisticated, informal, unstructured, and often are incredibly organized, doing very well financially. And that kind of trend has happened to this day. These are spaces that are actually doing incredibly well, very sophisticated, organized in their own way. But we tend to go like, everyone's poor, everyone's unemployed, and it's not true to that space. And so I built a business around accessing that market, a company called Minanawe Marketing.
What's it called, sorry?
Minanawe Marketing. Minanawe means you and I. And we were the first business focusing on the townships. With two partners, Jabulani and Sandile, and we literally pioneered township marketing and the opportunities in that space.
So when you talk about township marketing, it's basically marketing to that audience for bigger companies. So I like the term, and you mentioned it earlier when we spoke about the invisible market that people don't see. So just two things. One, if you can just explain the fact that you grew up in a rural area, how does that make you still confident to go into a township? Because they're different from each other as well. And were you seen as different? That's the first question. And then the second question is, if you can just start unpacking that invisible economy, if you can take that curtain down for us, that'd be fantastic.
So I think the first thing is that, Msinga was this very violent place with very tough. All the assassins in the taxi industry come from Msinga. They call them the Ngabis. And Msinga was famous for this kind of stuff. So we were brought up fairly tough and understood just the kind of patterns and the structure of these societies. It's about finding who are the guys in charge, whether they're tribal leaders or township politicians or ANC cadres, whatever it might be in those spaces. I mean, I'm talking now the late 80s, early 90s. And obviously language is an important thing, being able to speak the language. And so there I was as a white guy with, as you can see, I never had very long, when I was very young, I had long blonde hair, but it went very quickly. And so I was in the township with short cropped hair, I looked like a policeman, but I knew how to access the who was who in those places. I could speak the language.
How many languages?
I speak the Nguni languages, Xhosa, Zulu, Swazi fluently, and the Sotho languages, I'm conversational, so Sotho, Tswana, speak to a little bit of an extent. And so, I was able to really understand those spaces, and that's where access comes. I also was lucky enough to have ANC comrades who were I was in essence, it was a UDF at the time, but I was very much kind of an ANC supporter. I had all of these ANC buddies who lived in the township, so I could literally go and visit them, and then they connect me with their networks and so on. And I had a curiosity for those places. I loved going there. And a lot of the time it wasn't for work, it was go and have a drink, if it should be, or grab some traditional African meal or something like that. So, and I was very lonely in the city, in Joburg. They call Joburg Wandonga Zaduma, which means the place where the walls thunder. And so I lived in Yeovil, but I kind of spent a lot of time in those spaces and still do, because they are vibrant, exciting places.
So earlier you mentioned to me that we're saying our economy is not growing, it's stuttering, there's no growth. You said in the townships there's a complete different story.
Yeah, so I think the biggest mistake we make is that we are driven by these perceptions of headlines in the media. Unemployment is massive. My argument is real unemployment is closer to 12 to 15%. We led by headlines and we don't really see how big this is. And if it was really true that our economy was in such a bad situation and 1 in 2 people were unemployed and so on, I mean, we wouldn't have the retail turnover, we wouldn't have the social stability and all of these kind of things. So if we look at that economy as just as a starting point, the first thing we make this mistake of is thinking that this economy is rows and rows of hawkers and spaza shops, little hole-in-the-wall spaza shops. But it's a very multi-sectorial nature. Yes, so it is spaza shops. But if you look at that spaza sector, recent research by Nielsen, International Audit Business, shows that the spaza sector across 100,000 outlets turns over 187 billion rand a year. Last year, they turned over 160 billion rand a year. So they have a 25% growth versus the formal sector. Retail is turning over about, is growing at 14%. They measure across 25,000 outlets. They have an audit process. Another business trade intelligence that shows the same. I called my book Gastronomic Revolution because I said there's a revolution happening in this space. Their headline was Renaissance in the spaza sector. I still contend it's a revolution if it's growing that fast, turning over that. So some of these, and if we look at that within the spaza sector, the misconception, just hole in the wall spazas. Many of these are beautiful supermarkets, what I call the spaza sector. And I said years ago to the retailers, I've done work with the Pick and Pay group and ShopRite and Mass Cash and everyone. I've said for years that the next big thing is the what I call spaza the supermarket type spazas. And we've seen this amazing shift in the last 6 years to where the vast proportion of people are now purchasing at a spaza the supermarket type outlet. ShopRite has just bought Mass Cash's wholesale business and turned it into ShopRite Cash and Carry. They've recognized they can't compete with the township supermarket, so now rather supply them. So then, outside of that sector, we have the fast food sector. That's 50,000 outlets, 90 billion rand a year.
Just the restaurant.
That's the township restaurants. The perception, again, is that this is unhygienic street food. It's generally more expensive than Nando's or McDonald's or so on. Very much about casual dining, coming and sitting down. Boosted by load shedding. Then you have the alcohol sectors, 110 billion rand across 45,000 outlets. I mean, the most imported product, the most stolen product in South Africa's ports, according to the insurance industry, is hair extensions.
Wow.
So the hair beauty business, lashes, nails, and hair extensions. As you can see, I know a lot about hair. That has grown 64% in imports over the last 4 years, again, according to the insurance industry. So the hair market today is worth about 10 billion rand a year across about 60,000 hair salons. But again, let's look at that. So, and then there's other sectors. Just in rural KZN, my brother runs an extraordinary rural development project with goats. We import 500 1,000 goats a year from Namibia and Botswana. We don't breed enough goats in South Africa. That's a couple of billion rands worth of imports. Rural housewives in KZN who have goats sell about 3 billion rands worth of goats a year. And we just don't measure those incomes. But then if we look at the population dynamic, there's also been a dramatic change. So Stats SA shows, I often show this picture of rows and rows of shacks, and I say, well, what percentage of people live in informal dwellings? And I get 60, 80, 30, 40%. 8% of households today in South Africa live in informal dwellings, according to Census or South African General Household Survey. And so what we see is that the vast proportion of people live in a formal dwelling, huge investment in home building, home extensions and stuff like that. None with any form of formal credit or home loans or anything, money generated in this kind of space. The other factor that's changed dramatically over time is that the average household size today in South Africa is about 3.5 people per household. 25% of our households are one-person households, and 18% are two-people households. We have this perception that townships are about rows of informal dwellings. So as you fly into Khayelitsha to go to your wine farm, and you see shacks, and the kind of anecdotal thing is there must be lots of shacks. It's not true. We have a population of small households, people moving out of their communal dwellings into their own homes. And they're small households. 40% of households are under 2-people households in South Africa. Large households comprise about 30% of our households. So the point is that as the structure of the population changes, more formality, people start spending on things in their house, decor, design, ceilings, all these kind of things. A lot of money being spent on people's homes as opposed to trying to build a shack. Second part about it is small households spend much more money on personal items, even luxury items, and less on staples. So hence the hair extension number. Beauty's accelerating. And so actually we've got a society that the structure of the population has changed dramatically in a positive way. Smaller households, more formality. And there's lots more businesses supplying that sector. So, for instance, backroom rental in the townships is worth 20 billion rand a year conservatively. Sure. Those are what we consider kind of this little kaya in the back, but it's actually, some of them are beautiful rooms. They rent for 2.5 to 3,000 rand a month. According to the Department of Housing, this is the fastest, and the City of Cape Town, fastest growing sector in the country. Makes sense. Smaller households need these units. 26% of all residential rental today in South Africa is backroom rental. That 20 billion rand a year is earned by South African households, and that's conservative. I mean, if there's 1.8 million backrooms or rooms being rented, multiply that by 2.5, by 12, and so on.
And that's not in the formal. There's no taxes on that. There's no.
So that's cash. Most of it cash. Then you have the spaza sector is about 70% of those 100,000 outlets are 4 groups, Somalis, Ethiopians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis. They pay South Africans 25 billion rand a year in rental. Wow. So that's 50 billion rand a year conservative being earned by South African households. Now, if you are unemployed, sitting at home, but you were earning 15,000 rand a month from renting out your house as a spaza or renting out 3 backrooms at 2,500 rand a month, and someone came to you and said, do you have a job? You would be honest. You'd say, I don't have a job. We don't measure these other forms of income in this space. We don't measure non-pay slip incomes as jobs because they're not jobs. In essence, they're businesses. And asked a Alcock in downtown Joburg, she sells 3,000 vet cook a day for 1 rand each, and makes a profit of about 1,000, 1,500 rand a day.
So I want to actually unpack this. So you've got this woman selling the vet cook. Just take us through the whole analogy of Where does this income go and what does she make?
Yeah. So this Goko earns about R1,000 a day profit. You walk past her and kind of feel sorry for her, but she's making like, call it 20, 30,000 Rand a month. And she's building, her and her husband have been doing this for 10 years. They're building a double-story house in Meadowlands in Soweto. If you ask her and you say to her, do you have a job? She'll say, which is a play on words. I work, but I do not have work. Because she doesn't have a pay slip, financial institutions don't recognize her. We kind of walk past her and kind of consider it as a subsistence and a survival business. And it's not. And there's many other of these sectors. I mean, the taxi industry we know and love is 50 billion Rand a year. The herbal medicine business, Muti, is 18 billion Rand a year. Now, in 2014-15, I wrote in my book, Garcinomics, I wrote that the Muti sector was 150,000 herbal, it's homeopathic. It's in essence primarily plant-based. That sector was 150,000 outlets doing about 3 billion Rand a year. So everyone said to me, it's impossible. How is this possible? 3 billion Rand a year just in traditional herbal medicine. And that was a source, someone who'd done some research for the World Health Organization around it. In 2018, this 4 years later, the University of Pretoria did research and said, no, it's not 3 billion, it's 18 billion Rand a year sector. So these aren't even my figures, it's like this, the sector. And if you take a mirror to the formal economy, you will find every single one of those businesses represented in the informal economy, just operating slightly differently or under the radar. And we should be, celebrating this. We should be celebrating the transformation of housing from forum houses and shacks to these amazing houses. Now, the township street you can drive down now where you don't see the transformation into a more suburban type environment. We should be celebrating the entrepreneurial nature of the sector. And finding ways, particularly from a business perspective, how can we support, how can we enable these businesses, and recognizing the important contribution the sector is making to our economy.
Yeah. So if we go back and we unpack this lady, so she's selling the fit book.
Yeah.
And then she's getting 1,000 Rand a day.
Yeah.
Does that relate to the person selling sweets as well? But then she takes that money and then they build houses. So she's starting like a proper business and renting those out. And so again, we've got various layers of business. So someone like she's selling the 3,000 vet cook, she's on the street she wakes up and leaves Soweto at 2 in the morning. 3 in the morning, she's in downtown Joburg selling a vet cook. 10 o'clock in the morning, she's finished, she goes home. The space on the pavement is then replaced by a vegetable seller, because you don't buy vegetables in the morning, you buy them in the afternoon when you're coming back from work. And that vegetable seller can make anything from 3,000 Rands worth of profit a month. It's a lot lower than fast food. 3,000 Rand profit to up to 15,000 Rand profit, depending on the size and so on and so forth. But let's just stay with kind of the vegetable seller. The Joburg City Deep Joburg Fresh Produce Market is one of 18 fresh produce markets in the country. Joburg Fresh Produce Market is the biggest. It turns over 9 billion Rand a year. That 9 billion Rand a year, about 60% of that is informal traders. You come there early in the morning, purchase. As a simple example, I was involved with Business for South Africa during the COVID thing. I was on the SMME task force. And one of the things that happened is the government banned hawkers or the informal trade going to the city produce markets, which was insane, because it was like, rather go and get in a taxi and go to a formal vegetable place versus walking down the street and buying from the hawker. So we challenged this with government and asked them to rescind that ban. And so for 2 days, the Joburg Fresh Produce Market had no informal traders shopping from there. In those 2 days, they lost 40% of their turnover. Wow. And that just gives you a sense of the scale of the informal sector. And imagine the impact on the agricultural economy. I mean, during the riots,
the only people selling fruit and vegetables were, and the city market carried on selling was to the informal economy. Everyone else closed their doors or had been looted, and these guys carried on. So, as I said, you can take the mirror to the formal sector. You'll see exactly the same. Every one of those sectors is there. I mean, just the auto trade, which is panel beaters and mechanics, is 80,000 auto traders. There are 10 million unfinanced cars on our roads, primarily within townships. 40% of all cars, I believe, and again, these are not on my figures, are unfinanced cars. And these 10 million cars are serviced in the townships. A lot of your Uber cars that you're using are serviced by township mechanics who are highly efficient. They've got a little workshop. It's not just that and they've got a diagnostic electronic equipment, and they're really efficient. And so the taxi industry, which is 250,000 taxis, and these 10 million cars are largely serviced by, panel beaten by, an informal auto trade sector, and a highly efficient one. Often, for instance, the taxis, you drop your vehicle off in the afternoon, and then the next morning at 4 a.m. the vehicle's been serviced and you can carry on operating. You can't do that at Toyota, So choose any sector. So there's this, so what are those people doing? Those people are, in essence, have been in many years the fed cook seller for 10 years, a vegetable trader. You'll find most of these people have been trading in those spaces for many years. They're highly efficient businesses. They make a profit. If they weren't making a profit, they wouldn't be there. They don't have a trust fund to sustain their habit. So, and then what are they doing? They're investing that money back into their community. So I'm selling vegetables. I go home. I want some beautiful kitchen cupboards. Interior decoration and stuff in the township homes, just extraordinary, the transformation. So I want cupboards. I find the local guy in Kize down the road, and he comes and gives me a quote, and then he goes off and does their kitchen cupboards. I want to build a back room to rent. I get the local builder, Lamini. He comes and does it for me. So we find that the money circulates very much within those communities. And so there's a real compounding effect of that. I rent from the person, I buy my fast food from Bali down the street, and so on and so forth. And so you've got these economic ecosystems, in essence, operating, where we tend to kind of think that, well, people will, be in the township and they go out of the township to do shopping. And that has been true in the past, but that's now changed very rapidly. And we're seeing that with things like, taxi trips, transaction capital, very successful business, lost a vast proportion of their share. Why? SA Taxi, the taxi financing business, is struggling because lower commuter numbers. Why lower commuter numbers? People are not shopping at a formal retailer. They're walking to the spicery. They're walking to the hair salon. So we're finding this localization happening as the informal sectors improved the consumer experience, has improved their offering. People would rather shop closer to home, and we're seeing this in the suburbs, but we're seeing it even more rapidly in the townships. And so, there's these effects we're seeing on things like a transaction capital. You should potentially have anticipated this. I wrote about it in Gassinomics and Gassinomic Revolution, that people are going to start shopping closer and closer to homes. Mega malls and public transport will, be impacted. That has come to be. And this is one of the dangers. If we don't recognize these trends and we don't anticipate this kind of thing, there's a real impact on our business sector. And I think we should be looking at that sector more. And part of what I believe in, sitting here in an entrepreneurial environment, is it's about scale-ups. We talk a lot about, we want to create jobs. We want to help businesses start up. We're never going to do that. What we've got to do, we can't create jobs. What we've got to do is we've got to understand that there are a huge number of businesses up there who've been operating for years. How do we take them and scale them up? It's not about startup. And I'm a believer that if people are genuinely unemployed, as in doing nothing, they're unemployable. But if there are people there who are employed in whatever it might be, they're a plumber or whatever, how can we help scale that business? How can we help them build up that business to another level? Or if they're a little entrepreneur where they're selling fed cook, instead of kicking them off the streets, how do we find ways of enabling that business to grow? The Minister of Small Business Development said recently, we need more entrepreneurs in the townships. And it just tells you the vision that they cannot see. And my argument was, and I publicly said this, there are hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs in the townships. We have to recognize them as entrepreneurs and then say, how do we enable them and support them? But our problem is our vision is Elon Musk is an entrepreneur, not Gogo Delicious, who's selling her fed cook on the street corner. And actually, she's probably more resilient than Elon. Certainly less controversial.
So what do we take as the lessons as small businesses as we are? What can we learn from them, number one? And number two, just to answer your own question, what would you suggest are the ways we can go forward?
Yeah. So the starting point is recognizing that these businesses are businesses and are entrepreneurs. And that is primarily from the actual entrepreneur or township business person's vision. Often they cannot believe it. Like I wrote about the Gogo sells the fed cook. They said, well, why, when I was interviewing them, why do you want to know about us? I said, I love your business, an extraordinary business. And they were like, our business. I was like, yeah. So anyway, I wrote the book and I went there and I walked to downtown Joburg at like 6 a.m. I don't do the 3 a.m. stint, And I went there and they were busy, they were selling, and I arrived and I said, hi. And I said, I've got the book. I wrote the book, and in the book, there's a picture of her selling fed cook. And I opened it up, and the husband took the book and he just stared, and they stopped trading. Like there were these customers and they stopped and they were like, no, go next door, and they started going through it. And he said, and she said, they said, you wrote about us. You really wrote about us in this book. You said you would, but we didn't believe it. And I just could see that it was disbelief that I actually admired their business enough to have written about them. And I mean, the funny aside to that story, and I think that, can you imagine if we said to more of these businesses, and I see this all the time when I say to people, your business is extraordinary. You're doing an amazing job. It's like, really, and we should change that. So, but aside to that story, when I gave them the book, a guy from the fed cook stand next door walked over and he said, what's this? The guy said, no, the white guy wrote this book about us. And so he looks at it, he says, you've got very strong muti. He says, this white guy walks past all of us here all the time, we see him, but he stopped at your stand and wrote about you. You've got very strong muti. So that's the first thing. We should be celebrating these businesses. We should not be kicking them off the streets, which is what the Joburg Metro does. Yes, let's formalize certain components if that's what we need. Let's ask them to pay rent in exchange for security of not being kicked off the streets or whatever it might be. So the first is, let's recognize that as a sector, an important sector. The second part about it becomes, how do we enable them through things like, can we finance them? So I'll give you another little example. There's a lady, Debbie Singh, who rents out back rooms in Soweto. I did an interview with her on the Alcock show. And she rents out about, call it 20 rooms, and she makes 148,000 Rand a month. She's also got a job. She receives 148,000 Rand a month into her bank account. And she now has bought another property cash, and she wants to demolish it and build 31 units. She went to her bank and she asked her bank to lend her 1.5 million Rand to finish the job. And she said to them, you can see my salary and this 148,000 Rand going in my bank account. Will you finance me this for the room rent, the room business? It took 2 weeks, and at the end of 2 weeks and lots of paperwork, they declined her financing. So she wanted to test them. She said, okay, I want to finance a 1.3 million Rand Mercedes. And in 20 minutes, they'd approved her finance.
Mm.
And as she said, one appreciates, one depreciates. We cannot wrap our heads around this kind of business, that it's a real business and that we should be helping to finance them. And it's a tragedy. We have no structural finance where we kind of can help finance these businesses. The other component about it is, how do we bring in hybrid formalization? And the hybrid formalization is that most of these businesses operate informally, but parts of their business survive on the fact that they're informal. For argument's sake, they're on the street where the passers-by walk past. But equally, at the same time, we could formalize it by giving them access to water, electricity. We could digitize them through payments and so on and so forth. So, we need to look at it. We have two options in South Africa. You like formalize or don't formalize, you're kind of stuck there. And one of the issues is, for instance, how do you bring them into like registering their business? In Rwanda, it takes you 4 days to register a business. South Africa takes 40 days.
Wow.
And that's assuming you've got a proof of residence. Now, how many people in the townships who are operating a container in front of their property have a utility bill? They're paying pay-as-you-go electricity. We create hoops around these kind of things. How do we enable that outlet in a digital world to use digital formats to have a proof of address and so on, and that actually we're bringing them into this economy. So those are the primary ones. I mean, some of them for me are, what are the ways that formal businesses engage with the informal business, not where the informal business supplies the formal business. So, I mean, this is one of the things is kind of the government goes like, okay, what we need is Woolworths needs to get their bread from a township baker. It's never going to work. The power relationships, retail, and it's just never going to work. But I can tell you of a township baker, very, very successful, doing 2,000 loaves of bread, selling them in his community and doing really well. What's his problem? Load shedding is killing his business. And he's been begging people, he's been to the various government entities, will you give me a grant? Will you give me a loan so I can convert to away from electricity to gas or whatever it might be? Anyway, the point is this. So I'm working with the Supreme Flour, which is part of the RCL group. And we've tied up a database of a couple of thousand township bakeries. I mean, it's extraordinary how many of these township bakeries there are. And they're like, they're doing cakes and scones and bread and so on and so forth. Lots of these guys. We've tied them into a loyalty program where, in essence, they can earn points from using Supreme Flour, and they can receive that in everything from, mixing stuff to just things like aprons, some simple stuff. But many of the things that they can do is transformative. And what does it do? On the one hand, it helps the bakery business. On the other hand, Supreme Flour benefits from that. That for me is a reciprocal relationship where your customer is benefiting from buying your brand. And that's just one simple example of it. But we have very few of these kind of benefits going both ways. And you'll find people in the township. So I work with the Heineken Group as an example, and the Heineken Group has a program called Taverns of the Future, which is working with loyal taverners, upgrading their facilities, women's toilets, improving security, helping them with kitchens so they can sell food as an incremental business opportunity, and of course growing Heineken's range of brands at the same time. These for me are the kind of mindset we should be looking at, and certainly when I interact with township businesses, they're saying the same, like, how could I get some sort of benefit? I'm happy to be loyal to this business, but how do I get something? But we don't have enough of those kind of things.
What about the tax implication?
So tax is the first thing is that every one of these businesses pay VAT but don't claim VAT because they're not VAT registered. So there's a 15% benefit to the fiscus from that. The second part is that the assumption is that they don't want to pay VAT, and if they were registered, they wouldn't pay that, they're not registering because of that. It's untrue. Recent work by the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank, did work with 2,000 informal businesses around the country, and 3% of the reason they asked them, why do you use cash? 3% of them said because of tax implications. 97% are not interested. And in many ways, many of those businesses pay other kind of penalties for not being part of the formal system. So the other thing about the income is that what is the impact of this economy on the formal tax-paying economy? Tiger Brands, RCL, Unilever, South African breweries, where would they be? Or people supplying the building sector or whatever, where would they be if if our economy was really as bad as it was and unemployment was 40-odd%? Would they be turning over as much as they do and showing extraordinary results? Would people like Fashini Group in the clothing sector doing really well? The hair extensions, would we be importing 64% more hair extensions every year and having them stolen up? No, we wouldn't. So we have to also see the knock-on effect of this economy drawing from the ShopRite's just shown their most extraordinary results ever. Capitec is booming. These businesses are paying vast amounts of tax. They would not be paying their tax if they didn't have a demand from this sector, both from the business sector as well as the consumer sector. And that adds a lot of stability to our society. If we had really had the levels of poverty and stuff that we read about, we would not have the stability we have. What is the cost of stability? And so, I think we're often short-sighted with that. Having said that, we see the informal economy digitizing incredibly rapidly, accepting card payments, for instance, instead of cash, and in fact, encouraging card payments from cash. If you look at the spaza sector 2 years ago, 3 years ago, was doing 0 card payments. There's companies out there today, one is a listed business called Alcock, product called Kazang, shop-to-shop, Flash, all of these are seeing billions and billions of rands worth of card payments at the spaza shops. Now, that spaza was afraid of paying tax. They wouldn't be encouraging people to tap their card. 2 years ago, it was 0. So I think we often kind of see this is why they're operating in cash, but actually don't see, they prefer not to be in cash. And I'm working, I just launched a product for BankServe across the banking spectrum called PayShop, which is a cell phone, phone-to-phone payments product, instant settlement into your bank account using your cell phone number as a proxy. PayShop's going to transform the sector in terms of payments for small amounts. It's already doing an amazing job. And when I helped BankServe launch it, a lot of people said to me, people prefer cash. There's no way that they don't prefer cash. They often have no options.
Yeah. Your business is around introducing these companies into the township, into this invisible.
Yeah.
How are you doing, and how do you see the future? And it sounds, what you're telling us is that seems to be the future. That's we're not keeping them going, they're actually keeping us going.
Yeah. That's a very good line that I'll steal it. So the answer is yes. So what am I doing? I sold my business Minawe and I started in the Casinomics. I see myself more as an economic activist. So a lot of the work I do is not paying my rent. But I strongly believe that the transformation of our society doesn't lie in social welfare. It doesn't lie in politics. It lies in the business sector, the informal and formal business sectors. And that as much as possible, how can we stimulate that? So I'm really just trying to wave this flag and say, hey, I wrote in my book this concept of excavating silence. In oral societies, these are silent societies because it's not written down. So how do you then excavate that silence, and how do you bring it onto the fore? And I've been fairly successful, I think, in terms of bringing that agenda to the for in terms of, hey, there is this informal economy or township or rural economies, they're booming, let's look at them differently. And even government, Gauteng government's now launched a township development, economic development bill. I don't believe government can really change it, but they can certainly make bylaws adapt to this. So that's a kind of one hand is really about how do you raise awareness of this. The future of our economy relies on it. It's the right thing to do to bring these businesses to the fore and find ways of making them more sustainable and profitable and grow. On the other hand, I pay my rent through, advising businesses in the sector on how they should operate. My primary space is in marketing, I guess, and distribution. And so, so I work with a number of companies, and it's remarkable how many people are starting to recognize that are opportunities in this space, not only just the retailers, across the spectrum.
Fantastic, great, thank you. So we're going to open it up to questions.
I see that Tiger Brands announced recently that they're going to market more directly to the informal sector.
Yeah. Took them a while.
Do these businesses really want to formalize? Because they'll lose the benefit of not paying tax and not paying VAT. Do they really want to formalize?
So I would say almost every single one of the businesses out there want to formalize in some way or another, and that tax is the last thing on their minds. The benefits of formalizing are far higher than the negative of paying tax. And I'll give you an example. In that Tiger Brand story, they spoke about MIDI wholesalers. Now, MIDI wholesalers is a concept, as a term I've developed for informal township wholesalers, primarily foreign-owned. Those township wholesalers, average household like that can turn over 600,000 Rand to R1 million a day, 6.5 days a week. And these wholesale, the reason we know how much they turn over is companies like Kazan, Shop to Shop, Blue Label, Telecom, Cellpal and Co. went to these outlets and placed cash deposit boxes. And in essence, you had an app. The Somali wholesaler has got an app. Every time he receives cash, he puts it into the drop box. The risk moves straight away from him, and he can see the balance on his app, and he can use that app to pay directly to Tiger Brands, wholesalers, and so on and so forth. Now, you would imagine that guy who's got 600,000 Rand a day in cash doesn't want to be seen by the receiver and would just refuse to put money into that cash deposit box. The opposite has happened. They happily pour every single Rand into that box because the benefits of being able to not have to carry his cash away from there far outweigh any cost he has to pay in tax. And we see this across the board. The pain points of cash, the inability to be able to pay something remotely and have the Coca-Cola truck come and deliver, or the South African breweries truck, means that most people won't do that. So it's an urban legend. People aren't cash because of this. The vast proportion will move into that space and would prefer to move into that space. The problem is that depositing cash is incredibly expensive. If you've got a Dropbox, it's fine. I've said to the South African Payments Association, all of the banks, how do we remove cash out the system? Simple. Make cash deposits free. And if that's what we want, and we're complaining about cash in transit, heists and stuff like that, the minute the money's in the system, you need some other way to pay it. While you've got it in your hand, you go like, okay, if I deposit this money, it's going to cost me 9 Rand for every 1,000, 10% in essence. If you got 20,000 Rand, do you want to pay how much? At the end of the day, it makes no sense. And that's before I've paid my bank charges and all the other things. So people will move out, and I believe we will see cash go from about 85% of our economy in the next few years, with products like these card acceptance devices proliferating, products like the Pay Shop that I launched, move to probably 60% in the next 3-4 years, and probably continue a downward spiral from there.
Can I correct you?
Sorry, there were
You have
you
a question down here.
Sorry, you were talking a bit earlier about scaling businesses. You didn't really elaborate a bit on that. Maybe if you could just elaborate a bit on that.
So I mean, if you look internationally, there's been this concept of startups, and it's like got all this trend. And more recently, the growing thing is really saying startups, 1 in 10 survive. And I've started multiple businesses. It's not for sissies starting a business. So the new concept is around scale-ups. It's about how do you take a business that's turning over, call it 10,000 rand a month, and make it tomorrow 15, 20, and so on and so forth. Because at the end of the day, it's very difficult to incrementally grow a business. You can't go from turning over 10,000 to 10,500 to 11,000 because your overheads and stuff don't match it. You have to employ another staff member, they cost more than you. So your thing in a business is you've got to go from the 10 to 15 to 20,000. Now, if we can help those businesses do that, and there's a number of ways. One of the first ones is giving them security of tenure. If that gogo on the street who's selling fed cooks, when I say to her, why do you use an old door and cardboard kind of wind protector around your cooking stuff? She said, I would never get new stuff because the Metro police come and confiscate it. What if I said, okay, well, I'm not going to confiscate it. I'm going to give you permission. I drove my wife crazy. I went to New York for the first time, 2019. And in Times Square, there's all these hot dog stands. And they've all got permission to operate from there. And they pay rent from that. And the factor of it is that they've made the fed cook seller in New York a feature of the city and structured it so that they could. So they're informal traders on a street. They made them part of the city, not only as a tourist feature, but also an economic kind of thing. So why can't we do the same? There was a recent story about a guy selling sandwiches outside Standard Bank in Rosebank, was making 20,000 rand a month and supporting his daughter. And the Metro police came and confiscated his stuff and kicked him off the street. Now, I mean, that's insane. In a country, if we have 40%, 37% unemployment, really. So if that trader knew that I have permission to trade from here, and you can do it through a simple device, which is called a PTO in the rural areas and tribal areas, is a PTO is a permission to occupy. It's like sectional title. You have rights to operate from this space and you pay for it either through a 99-year lease or you pay a monthly thing, and that gives you the rights to operate from here. What the government does is they go and build a little facility 5 kilometers from where all the commuter traffic is. If you said to the hot dog stands in New York, why don't you stop trading here? We built you a fancy place 5 Ks away. They're going to be looking crazy. There's no people walking past. I need the person to be in arm's reach from it. So we need to understand what makes that work, and then say we can give you security of tenure. You may operate from here within certain constraints, absolutely. We can help you access finance by giving you a card acceptance device, so you can so we have a track record of your business. We don't need an audited statement. We need a track record of your business, and if you accept a card, So I think there's a number of things. We don't look at how do we help that business become more profitable, more sustainable, more secure. And Rafilwe, a guy in Soweto mentioned, who's got the bakery, he can't get a single bank to finance his bakery, despite the fact that he's been going for 6-7 years. He does 2,000 loaves of bread a year. He can, a day. He can show you. He buys a pallet of Supreme flour every single week. And he can show this track record of what he's purchased. A bank doesn't go and say, geez, well, you must be doing some sort of turnover. You're buying a pallet a week. It's not like you're pouring it down the drain. So we look at input costs. Can we look at input costs or other sources of income in terms of understanding how that, is there a digital trail of these things?
So to follow on that, so these are outside of the corporates, like you mentioned, the number of corporates like Heineken, etc., that are obviously entrenched in the market. Are there a lot of entrepreneurs that have taken positions with entrepreneurs in the townships to actually provide bridging finance, like that woman you needed R1 million,
Yeah.
whatever it was, to build extra units.
Yeah.
Is there access? Is that sort of?
It's there. It's not particular. I mean, there's a growing number of people in the backroom rental sector. One is Tough, TUHF. Another one. There's a whole bunch. I forget the other one, but something. Supplying finance into that. There's a bunch of businesses doing stuff in the spaza sector, but quite honestly, it's just touching the surface.
Surely that's going to be a big opportunity.
Oh, it is. I mean,
Gigi, can I just pull something in about an alt project?
Yeah.
A number of years ago, one of the Max Steel approached us. They have a number of small businesses metal from them.
Yeah.
They were too small to actually have Max Steel making money. They just couldn't get them to get anywhere near critical mass. They came to Ort and said, can you give these guys upskill training and we will subsidize that cost of training. They increased their employment, they increased their turnover, and it was a most successful project.
Yeah.
And that's what Max Steel funded.
and that's the model that I think needs to happen across more sectors, but at scale again, so yes, there's people going into the space and doing very well. I mentioned the one company, Lasaka. Lasaka is a listed business and they're in the spaza and tavern digital payments space. Ikorka, another one, similar to Yoko. Ikorka now keeps a track record of your payments, and I think they lend up to 40 million rand a month, or at any given stage, might be more, to the people based on their track record, and then they deduct it from card payments. To very clever. So there's a number of people in there, but I mean, you know what? These things don't shape our economy enough. They're not going to make a difference until it becomes a really big thing. At which stage are we doing this at scale? Because, say like a Caucus may be helping, 200 businesses. Kazang's at 40,000 outlets and thumb sucking. So Tough is probably supporting, 2,000 at a push, backroom rental dwellers with financing. And we're talking now 18 million households. We're talking conservatively 750 billion rands worth of turnover by informal businesses. I mean, that's at 750 billion rand across probably 2 million informal businesses.
Yeah.
So we're not touching the thing, and until we really have a proper focus on those 2 million businesses, a couple of tens of thousands aren't going to make that difference, and we need to almost have that shift in saying this is what we're going to do.
In terms of your comments in regard to the actual people in townships not wanting to get in the taxi and go to the formal sector, are there opportunities, because I see that has been developed, for regional shopping centres on the outskirts of the townships? And there seems to be a move to black entrepreneurs who are getting finance to put together those shopping centres.
Yeah.
And if they have those type of formal brands, they still appear to attract those kind of customers. The other question is, what are your views on the acceptance within the township of franchises, a chicken franchise or something other franchise, even kind of in a container? Or do they prefer not to have whatever brand is formal and rather sell under the guise of, as you say, their relationships or posse traffic?
So when it comes to the shopping centres, there's a very high penetration of shopping centres in the townships, and I've worked with a lot of developers in that kind of space.
Right.
So the problem is that the movement is away from these mega malls and much more about neighborhood malls, what I call strip malls, and the industry calls convenience centers.
Right.
Because of this thing of people want to walk the walking distance or a local taxi ride, they're not taking a ride away. We also see that malls are typified by 2 to 3 to 4 hour queues. People queue at an ATM, queue at the shop. I mean, it is disgusting the way we treat people in those township shopping centers. They stand in queues and I've done work for every one of the formal retailers and banks, and they agree. And I'm like, guys, you cannot treat your customers like this, where they've got to stand in queues at a ShopRite or what. But that's the nature of it. And that's meant that consumer experience means that it's easier for me to just go to the local spot, either formal or informal. So there's a real opportunity in getting retail penetration in more kind of what I call high streets, in the main township streets that crisscross the township in this convenience center format. The second part of it is that the average shopping center, you go into the shopping center, and outside the shopping center, there are thousands of traders on the periphery. We never create a facility for a hair salon, an independent township hair salon, to have the hair salon in the center, or a fast food outlet that's selling chicken dust, which is the township thing, to be in there. And I can give you specific examples of that. We never build our shopping centers to be inclusive of the communities around them. And just shifting that, I mean, and I was with a shopping center the other day, a group of shopping centers, a listed entity. I was like, guys, this is going to kill your businesses. Why are you not creating a fruit and veg market inside the shopping center? Because you have this absurd notion that because we've got fruit and veg city inside the shopping center, we can't allow the hawker who's going to compete. Well, the hawker's competing anyway. They're just sitting on the boundary and they're selling vegetables more expensive than fruit and veg city, but are fresher. And so the consumer says, no, I won't buy them now, I'll buy them as I walk out of here. But surely we should be incorporating those into our business models. Apart from anything, it would be lucrative. And I'm not saying give them a free stand, charge them rent. And then in terms of franchises, there are some franchises that have been relatively successful, like people like Dunlop have these kind of container car, tire replacement repair services. I think the franchises work when the barriers to entry need something like that. So like to access tires at scale and the equipment and machinery makes sense to do a Dunlop one. But for a fast food outlet, a KFC versus a chicken dust, and Lady Mbali does incredibly well with this chicken dust outlet. She can access chickens, she can get all her vegetables. She doesn't need that. We look at retail. Pick and Pay had a very widely publicized thing where they took township Spicer shops, converted them into super Pick and Pays, mini Pick and Pays. It's been a disaster. Because the Spicerette is going to operate as successfully without Pick and Pay's muscle. And they overcapitalize. A lot of franchises get people to overcapitalize on what it must all look like the same one and have lights and whatever it might be. And that becomes then unsustainable to repay that. So it's a mixed bag. I think that the real opportunity of franchises is more about loose associations, like I think ShopRite's wholesale business is genius. Just supply them. So go to all the chicken people and say, powered by KFC, and supply them with the KFC and your secret recipe, but don't ask them to convert your business into a KFC. I'm just using that as an arbitrary example. Yeah. But there's other ways to, in essence, have more network kind of things where you supply these and they're probably more financially lucrative. So the underlying concept of franchising, I think, can work certain group functions, but within a loose kind of structure, almost an Uberized franchise.
So we've got a question there. Yes.
Yeah, so the reason about scaling up, from what I've seen in Australia, to going in the market now for like 6 odd years and going nowhere slowly, is that we as urban, not always white, but the white people don't even know what goes on in the township.
So I think that the media does us a misservice.
Yeah, for sure.
I read a headline the other day, last year. My wife goes crazy. She says, "You stop reading the media." It's like they had a headline: "Cash-strapped consumers turn to alcohol and clothing."
Yeah, that's true.
And the headline was about the fact that ShopRite and Pick and Pay's liquor and clothing divisions were growing at 12 and 17% effectively. And they wrote it in a way which said, despite the fact that no one's got any money, they're going to buy Johnny Walker Black and Nikes. I mean, it's absurd. The story should have been, how is it possible that people are able to afford alcohol and clothing at such scale? Clearly, there's more money out there. Shouldn't we be finding out more? But we perpetuate a negative thing which says that people have no money, people are poor. At very best, 11%, according to Stats SA, 11% of households live on the breadline. That tells you that 90% do not live on the breadline, and we have a very strong lower middle and higher middle classes who are actually doing very well, thank you very much. And what we do is we extrapolate this negative story to assume as representative of the population. And we're doing a disservice where townships are like suburbs today. I don't care where you go. I was in Khayelitsha in a few months ago in June with the ShopRite Financial Services team of 20 people. We went around Khayelitsha. Once we passed the first row of shacks, we were in suburbs. And the guys were like, are you sure this is Khayelitsha? We thought Khayelitsha is just shacks and shacks and shacks. You know, at best, 10% of Khayelitsha is shacks and declining. It was 20% 10 years ago. Now it's 10%. And any township you can go to, but we have this thing as townships are these places. But townships are just like any city. Hillbrow, I don't want to go to Hillbrow, but I'm happy in Houghton and Bryanston. Soweto, Pimville is better than Zola, and so on and so forth. I know this. It changes my dynamic. I took out some, as I mentioned, I worked with the Heineken Group. They've taken over Distel, and Distel has a very big wine portfolio. And I've been doing work with them. And we went to Soweto with a British guy and some of the Stellenbosch-based marketing people. And we drove around. Mokgodu Monday, Mokgodu Monday is big in the townships. It's a really big celebration and African food and stuff. We drive around to these places, and one of them was a little hole-in-the-wall bottle store like this. And he had Canon Corp Cadet, Rupert and Rothschild, Optima, and Niederberg Baron. And so Niederberg Baron is like the cheap one. He kind of almost hid it. And they were like, and then they were like, okay, well, and this guy turned over R1 million a month from this little hole in the bottle store. Then we went down the road and we were just driving, and the guy said to me, this can't be normal. I was like, okay, cool. The next time we just pass a randomly seen bottle store, we screeched to a stop, this funny little place, and I thought, there's no way. He's probably got 4th Street boxes of pink rosé, sweet wine. And we arrived there and we popped through, and there's just Canon Corp Cadet. He says, Canon Corp Cadet is getting really popular these days. And then, I mean, we just went all over, and it was like this, just like, and they kept saying to me, this can't be normal. I'm like, no. That's the problem. Your perception of the world out there is not normal. What's normal is what you're seeing in front of you. Premiumization, there's money out there. I mean, what is the most common business township youth start? Unemployed township youth start in the township. Every street has one. Is a car wash. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that people have cars, they want to wash them and make them look beautiful. It's not, Maputo and Lagos doesn't have car washes. Everyone's running around delivering stuff. They don't want to clean the car and polish the tires. South Africa, we have this thing. So these are indicators that just show a higher level of lifestyle and opportunity. And I agree with you 100%. The perception is wrong. The perception is creating the wrong thing. We just end up being pessimistic and doomsday scrolling through the media, and the media are not telling these stories. And I've been accused of, you tell these stories and, how true are they for the majority? And then I go and I pull out Census South Africa, South African General Household Survey, which is an extraordinary tool. And they just keep showing things. I mean, poverty was something like 29% 10 years ago, according to the census. And today it's sitting at 12%. That's a decline in poverty. If you read the headlines, you don't see, no one's writing that. People living on the breadline, 11% of households in South Africa. Now that is shocking. That's out of 18 million households, call it 2 million households are living on the breadline. That is shocking. We should do something about it. 8% of households are living in informal dwelling. Unacceptable. But it's not 90%. It's not, it's at best
then 9%.
The best, the poorest people and the most informal people are no more than 12% of our households and of our population. And we are entrapped in just looking at this image and not talking about and celebrating the extraordinary business people, the extraordinary inhabitants of these spaces, who just carrying on with their lives and putting beautiful houses together and buying fed cooks and so on and so forth. Why are we trapped in the 10 and the 12%, particularly as business people? If you are an NGO dedicated to helping the poorest and the most dispossessed, that's your market. If you're not, just raise your eyesight a little bit. There's a very different thing out there.
I think in London there's now, so how will I literally have a 5-star hotel? Space.
There's a place called Aces,
Sorry.
in Khayelitsha. It's a double story. It's like, now here we are supposedly, you know, in the worst place. Khayelitsha, they always show pictures of rows of shacks next to formal stuff. I mean, it's just such a misrepresentation of reality. And then you go to Aces and it's just extraordinary. I mean, he sells more high-end, expensive champagne than, you know, isn't this the issue, is that we are trapped in this endless negative thing about this space. And in essence, we're insulting the people who are getting out every day, selling their fed cook or their chicken dust, building their houses, you know, extending and doing well. And we should be celebrating this amazing entrepreneur and middle-class sector and finding ways to help them accelerate out of this space.
What about the villages? You speaking mainly about the townships, the villages,
it's exactly
rural villages.
26, according to the UCT Liberty Institute, they came out with a report called Black Diamonds a few years ago. According to them, 26% of the black middle classes in South Africa, those are households that earn more than 40,000 rand a month. A quarter of them live in rural areas. The transformation of rural areas is quite extraordinary. I mean, the houses you find if you go to Thohoyandou or if you do Kumankweng outside Polokwane, the rural economy is absolutely booming. Rural towns that have populations around them, I'm not saying Ermelo, but I'm saying Burgersfort, Bushbuck Ridge, Mthatha, you cannot believe the business that is happening in those places. So what I'm describing is exactly the same in the rural environment. So yeah, the question.
I'm just listening to you talking to the companies that you're partnering with, and it feels like there's a hesitation to reimagine a future. What is their what is in your perception their hesitation?
So the biggest problem is this, is people say, where's the data? We data rich and insights poor. And they say, what is the business case? We need to tell our shareholders or our directors or our execs, here is the business case that illustrates we're going to do this and we're going to earn so much. And my argument is, if you looked at Uber, there's on LinkedIn, there was a wonderful PowerPoint presentation, which was Uber's original business plan. And it showed 50 taxis in San Francisco, I think 60 in New York, and they were going to turn over some ridiculously low amount of money because they just had no data. No one had data. No one still has data of how many rides are out there, how many potential private cars would convert. Airbnb, look at their story. How did they know how many beds were available? They kind of knew a few friends and started doing it. To enter these spaces, we need to understand different stuff. There are no business models, but the business, Steve Jobs, ask him what his business model was on Apple. He didn't have data that said, this is how many people will want an iPod. This is how many people will want an iPhone. He understood things and built the opportunity around it. Businesses no one was fired for designing the Corolla. There's Elon Musk converting the world. We need to go beyond. And if you look at the businesses that have gone beyond, ShopRite, Capitec, some of the businesses I mentioned, like the Lasaki Group and people like that, they're reaping the benefits of going into those spaces. But the biggest hesitation is, where is the data? These guys at Distill, there's no way that people are buying wine at that level. Where's the data? But wine disappears out of crates, cases, and ends up somewhere, but we don't know where. So then we're like, no. And this is the big issue, is that when looking at this market, we cannot only rely on data. Yes, let's find the data sources. It's an extraordinary book called Factfulness about understanding data, and talks about, the subtitle is How the World is Getting Better and You Don't Know It, written by a Swedish called Hans Rissle. It's an extraordinary book, well worth reading. And he talks to this fact about finding data and understanding what the data is telling you. Things like I mentioned, smaller and smaller households, one-person households. What's the data telling you? People are going to buy smaller pack sizes of rice and maize meal and stuff in stores. But if we talk to the retailers, they go, oh, the economy is in trouble because people are buying smaller and smaller pack sizes. So they're buying like only 5 instead of 10 kgs. They clearly can't afford to buy 10 kgs to feed the 10 people in the family. And I said to a retail exec, I was like, well, do you know that this is a percentage of small households? And do you think that it's not a factor of the economy, it's a factor of the size of household? Like, no, I didn't know that. What are we reading in the data? We're often misreading it because we're led by mindset, which is everyone's poor. So everything I see in the data is telling me about how poor they are, not that things have changed.
Great. So we're running a little bit out of time, but I'm sure Gigi will be here to answer specific questions afterwards. I just want to say, just so we can formally wrap it up, that for me, the lesson out of this, and it's a line that I often use, is when you look at things differently, you see different things.
100%.
And I think that's the message that you're giving us. And just to quote again the line that you said that you were going to steal so that you can steal it, is for me an eye-opener here was that we're not here to save them. They're actually saving us, and we're not even aware of it.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you for your insights and for opening up our eyes to, and really, I'm feeling more optimistic now about our future, because 40% unemployment you can't live with. And I never ever thought, I always thought, how are we surviving like that? When in fact it's not. It's not the problem. So just thank you so much for your insights and your input.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I'm David Zidel, and I'll see you next time in the boardroom.